Well, good morning. Today we're going to be talking about Luke 19. As you know, we've been going through Luke for a very long time. And we're finally getting to, in my opinion, the good part. This is Luke 19 is where things in Jesus' ministry really start to amp up. And he starts to do some things, in my opinion, kind of contrary to what he's done in the past. He's laid sort of low in the past, and he's been, especially early on, he would do a healing and say, okay, don't tell anybody, just go home and be with your family or go to the temple. Well, not anymore. This is where things are going to pivot and change. So before we go into that, I just want to do a little recap of Sam's sermon last week. He asked the question, when Jesus was going through a big crowd, a blind man was crying out to him for help. And Jesus asked the blind man, "What do you want from me?" Wow, what a question. I'm not sure who the blind man believed Jesus to be at that point. Did he really believe he was the Son of God or a prophet? I mean, to believe he was going to be healed, he had to have a lot of faith. So Sam's point was that he could have just asked for bread for the day, but instead he asked for healing that would change his life. Now, when I heard that, I had a very different response to it. I thought he should have gone bigger. Like, this is God saying, "What do you want me to do for you?" And all he asks is for healing? Just, I don't know. I feel like this is like the genie moment where you go, I wish for 100 more wishes, and then I want, infinity and, immortality. He could have gone anywhere with this. Jesus was like, "What do you want me to do for you, man?" Now, of course, any of us in that position, if we were blind, you have a disability, the first thing on your mind is get rid of my disability and my life will be 10 times better. So you can't blame him. And, of course, Jesus was doing a lot of healings, and he never blamed anyone for asking to be healed of what they were dealing with. As Psalm says, he remembers we are dust, and he doesn't get upset that we don't have his eternal perspective. But he is always pushing, especially with his disciples, to give them that eternal perspective. I think if Jesus had asked Israel as a whole, "What do you want me to do for you?" I think they would say, "We want the Messiah to come, and we want the Messiah to bring what God has promised us so long ago." That's really what they were waiting for. If we look at Isaiah, let's see if it works. The clicker's working today. Isaiah 9:7 says, this is a promise, a segment strictly about the Messiah. This is the one earlier than this is usually what we hear about for Christmas. But this is verse 7. It says, "Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice, righteousness, from that time on and forever." Of course, the bolding and underlining was my addition. But what they had been promised through the Messiah was peace, justice, righteousness forever. Right? Isn't that what we all want? We just want some justice in the world, and we just want to be at peace forever. Right? Every time I hear the news, that's what comes to mind. Can we just get some justice, a little righteousness from the people, and peace that will last? So the main thing that was really troubling the Jews at this time was they had been taken over by the Roman Empire. Now, the Roman Empire was bringing on Pax Romana, which ironically is called Roman peace, although Roman peace was really only peaceful for the Romans. It was not peaceful for the people they were enforcing their own laws on and basically taxing to death. And they could punish whoever they wanted to punish. There was no one over the Romans. They could really do whatever they wanted. And they had no respect for the Jews at the time. The Jews were considered, inferior people who very silly, strange religious ways that the Romans were way above. So, as a community, as a nation, as a people group, during the time of Jesus, the Israelites were suffering. They were definitely suffering. No wonder they just wanted some peace and for God to get rid of their enemies. So, as Jesus is amping up his ministry, let's go to Luke 19. We're going to look at the triumphal entry. We're getting into Easter time, so we're going to be hearing about this again in a few more weeks. But we're going to look at it with a kind of a little different twist today, in the frame of mind that as Jesus is proclaiming himself to be Messiah, this was probably what was on the Israel's minds at this time. This is what God had promised for them. So I'm going to go to, starting in verse 36. I'm just going to kind of summarize it a little bit. It says, as he went along, this is Jesus, he's got his donkey at this point, so he's on his steed going along the road. It says, the people spread their cloaks on the road. He came near the place where the road goes down and goes up the Mount of Olives, and the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. And they're shouting, blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest. So if you can imagine this scene, this is kind of Jesus' like coming out moment. Like he's coming out of the closet as the Messiah. He's allowing them to worship him publicly. They're shouting, they're going crazy. It's very public. You know, they're laying coats down. Other versions say they're, doing the palm fronds and all those things. And so this is a big deal. This is like this, almost kind of like this celebration going on, and it's in a public place. It's right outside of Jerusalem. And Jesus was coming for Passover. So there were a lot of people there because one of the laws was all the men at that time, and with their families, if they were able, were supposed to actually pilgrimage to Jerusalem for the Passover every year. And of course, the Pharisees get very upset, and they tell Jesus, make these people be quiet. This is very inappropriate. You're causing a scene. And Jesus says, well, if they aren't crying out, the rocks are going to cry out. So basically, this is an ordained moment for him to proclaim himself Messiah and to let people worship him publicly. This is supposed to be a big deal. And this is a big turning point in his ministry where he's like, bam, here I am. Take it or leave it kind of a thing. They're calling him a king in this, and he's accepting that. The king who's going to come sit on David's throne that's been vacant for hundreds of years. And they're also proclaiming peace. They say, what was the exact quote? Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. So they're ready for him to come and bring them the peace they've been promised roughly 800 years ago when Isaiah said this. So if I was at the Mount of Olives, we've got this crowd cheering. Jesus is on his donkey going along. We'll keep doing this. So in my opinion, this is the moment for an inspirational speech. And then you go drive down with your crowd and you kick the Romans out of Jerusalem. I mean, I'm a little dramatic, but that's kind of what, to me, would be the natural thing to do. You could have a moment like this. I don't know if any of you have seen this movie. This is called Braveheart. And there's a very inspirational, powerful moment where William Wallace is leading the Scottish people to battle their oppressors, who at that time were the British Empire. And he rides his horse back and forth, freedom, kind of a thing. So I just kind of imagine that this could have been the moment Jesus could have had. He's got his donkey and he's got the screaming crowd. This is the time to rile him up and start bringing that peace and claim his throne. Right? Isn't that what he's supposed to do? Isn't that what it said he was supposed to do? Because driving out the Romans would bring them the peace they had been promised. Right? That's where my mind would be if I were there at the time. It's natural to think that driving out a corrupt leadership would bring justice, righteousness, and a government of peace. Lots of times I get very frustrated with our government, and I keep thinking if only the right person would get in, we'd finally have some justice. If only we had the right programs, if we had, the right things going on, we'd finally get people acting in a decent way, and we'd finally get some justice for people, and my life would feel much more peaceful. I would be more at peace within myself. But Jesus, he doesn't do this. He doesn't, of course, have his Braveheart freedom moment. He does something very different and unexpected. He gets to the top of the Mount of Olives. He's got the city of Jerusalem laid out before him. From that height, you can see the whole city. And instead of his inspirational speech, he starts weeping. He starts crying. They call it lamenting. So this isn't like the happy silent tears. This is like which was common in that time if you were really grieving. Have a big show of emotion. It's a little weird to think of that now. You're supposed to go home and do that behind a closed door and then come out, present yourself. But it's still, people have been shouting. This is an exciting moment. And he gets to the top of the hill and he starts to weep. This is not the powerful moment you would think he would have, but it's a different kind of powerful moment. So we're going to go to, let's read about it. We have Luke 19. We're into verse 42 through 44. I'm going to kind of go through it sentence by sentence. So it starts with, this is what Jesus says as he's weeping. If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace. But now it is hidden from your eyes. And I believe he's saying this out loud because everyone heard this. So as they're rejoicing that he's the king and that he's going to bring peace, he starts to stop and says, you don't even know what will bring you peace. And it's hidden from you. He's not blaming them. He's not criticizing them or being like, you idiots. He says it's hidden from your eyes. And he's sad about it. He wished they knew what would really bring them peace and what was really going on. So we'll keep going. Then he keeps weeping and goes on, and he says, the days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and your children within your walls. Yikes. So Jesus is widely accepted that he's foretelling what will actually happen 40 years from this point in 70 AD, which is when Rome attacks Jerusalem using siege warfare. This is a very detailed and accurate description of siege warfare, being hemmed in, starved out for a while, and then coming in and just a slaughter and attack. So God at this point has shown Jesus things that are going to happen in the future. And he's upset about it. He's sobbing over it. He's lamenting. So my thought is, shouldn't he do something to stop this from happening? If he's upset about it and he's seeing his children suffer, isn't he going to do something? Well, we'll find out why. He says, they will not leave one stone on another because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. Now, the people were just praising him, calling him king, and saying he's going to bring peace. But Jesus is also seeing what's going to happen in the future, that them recognizing him as king is going to be very short-lived. Because eventually it's not going to take too much, and they're going to turn on him and actually hate him and despise him, and he's going to end up being killed by these people. But still, he's weeping for his children. In this moment, we get to see the compassionate heart of God for his people, even though he knows they're going to be making serious mistakes and turning on him. So we've been going through this book by N.T. Wright, Luke for Everyone. And Wright says about this moment, remember with awe that if Luke is indeed about Jesus embodying the long-awaited return of God to Zion, those tears are not just the human reaction to a sad and frustrating situation. They are the tears of a God of love. Another version of this event adds that Jesus says he wants to gather his children under his wings, like a mother, I don't know, some sort of bird, chick or... Sorry, it's losing. I can't remember the exact quote. You can look it up if you want. Like a swan. My daughter says it's a swan. It's kind of, that's kind of a motherly moment for him. To be like, I want to be a hen, and I want to gather my kids up and protect them. So if that were me, and I knew that this suffering was going to happen to my kids, I'd be ready to wage war. I'm not letting this happen to my kids. So, I would be down there, kick and roll out, doing anything I could. You're not going to treat my kids this way. But Jesus does. He has an urge to save his children. Even though he knows it's going to happen, he wants to save them. And he does actually wage war. Just not on who you think he would. Going on, 2:45. This is where he goes to wage war. Then Jesus entered the temple area and began driving out those who were selling. It is written, he said, my house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers. And then every day he was at the temple teaching. So first thing he does is he goes to his own house and cleans it up. So the temple is the place where God's Spirit is actually supposed to dwell, in the most holy place. So the temple is the place where really God connects with his people. It's where, Jesus being God, where, his Spirit is supposed to reside. The irony is they probably wouldn't let him into the Holy of Holies, where his Spirit is supposed to be. But, he didn't make an issue of it. So he goes in and he starts throwing out the people who are setting up shop, basically, because the Jews were supposed to be making sacrifices, and people were taking advantage of this and overpricing the animals and things you were supposed to burn or sacrifice. Making a good living, basically, it's a type of, I can't think of the word right now, but a type of oppression and taking advantage of people and what God has told them to do. So all four Gospels they call this the cleansing of the temple. All four Gospels have this in them. So this is a very significant moment in Jesus' ministry. So he drives them out and then spends his time in his temple teaching the truth. What is actually supposed to be going on in this temple? And he corrects that. That is the war he wages when he goes down into Jerusalem. John's a bit more graphic. This is the Luke's passage. In John, it describes Jesus makes like a whip of cords, and he's driving people out, and he's pushing all the animals out, and there's cows running around, and chickens, and whatever, doves, and everything flying away. John's description is pretty graphic, that this was, people knew what was going on. I'm sure it spread very quickly what was going on at the temple. So I have a little picture of this. Hopefully you guys can see that. Jesus is in the middle. It looks like he's holding a snake, but it's actually supposed to be a whip of cords there. This is an etching by Gustave Doré. Buyers and sellers at the temple. Now, I grew up in church, and I remember several times, probably once a year or twice, this lesson would come up, and there would be pictures like this in the lesson. This was always one that was hard for me to understand, Jesus cleansing the temple like this, because well, first off, it was kind of cool that he was doing something, physically aggressive. But at the same time, it was so different than anything else Jesus had done in his ministry up to that point. I mean, he looks angry. He's being forceful. And this is not a turn the other cheek moment. I mean, Jesus has plenty of those, and his ultimate turn the other cheek moment is coming with his death, but not at this moment. This is the moment where he is laying down the law. And that can be a little disturbing to see sometimes. It might get you excited, or it might be kind of like, ooh, that's not the Jesus I know about. Driving people out and making a scene. Well, let's look at what he was talking about when he went in there. What was his frame of mind at that moment? He said, I'm going to try and go back here. He said, "My house will be a house of prayer." Now, this is a quote from Isaiah 57, where Isaiah is describing what the temple is supposed to be, and then it's supposed to be this place. It's actually talking about believing Gentiles and eunuchs coming in, and that even though the eunuchs don't have a big family and they aren't doing what Jews are supposed to be doing, they're still welcome at the temple. And the temple is supposed to be inclusive. It's not just a place for, insiders to be. And Isaiah says, oh yes, this will be my house of worship. It will be known as a house of prayer for all people. So Jesus is doing a direct quote, and everyone there would have known this. He's quoting Isaiah of what his house should be. So what were they actually doing wrong at the temple? I talked a little bit about it. But when he says, "You've made it into a den of thieves," he's actually quoting another Old Testament section, which is in Jeremiah. And in Jeremiah, he's talking about, again, the temple and Israel in general and all the corruption that's going on. And that it's been turned into, well, the Message calls it a hangout for robbers. I like that version a little bit. But, or this den of thieves. And so in Jeremiah 7, they talk about what was going on and why God was angry with the Jews and why punishment was coming. It says, "For truly, if you amend your ways and your deeds, if you truly practice justice between a person and his neighbor, if you do not oppress the stranger, the orphan or the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place, nor follow other gods to your own ruin, then I will let you live in this place, in the land that I gave to your fathers forever and ever." So by Jesus saying den of thieves, which is just a little further on in this passage in Jeremiah, basically he's saying that these things are going on in the temple right now. They're not practicing justice. They're oppressing people. They're shedding innocent blood. And they're following other gods. Now, they weren't technically following, statues, but if you think that the whole outer court there is filled with people selling overpriced doves, really the god has become wealth. That's not a worship of God in an inclusive way to bring people into this house of prayer. Really, extortion and wealth has become the god in the temple. So, of course, Jesus is angry. This isn't what it was supposed to be and what he had set up. And this is the reason he's saying is why God is going to allow Rome to take them over, because they're breaking the covenant with him. They were supposed to follow his ways, and he would be their God. And they would have protection, and they would have peace and protection. He's getting at the source of what's actually going on at the time. And of course, he's going to have trouble later on when we get to chapter 20. The people profiting from this don't like it. That he's basically calling them out and saying, there is not righteousness or justice being done in my temple right now. Going back to the picture, it's easy to think that Jesus entered the temple and then saw what was going on and was like, what? this was like a shock and awe moment for him, but it, and that maybe he had like a temper flare, and that's what happened. But that actually isn't what's going on at all. Jesus had been to the temple over and over throughout his life. It says when he was growing up, his whole family went to the temple every year for Passover. So he knew what was going on here. This wasn't a, shock and he just loses it kind of a thing. This is a strategic moment of justice. He's sick of the misrepresentation. He's sick of the defilement that's been going on at the place that's supposed to be a representation of him. And he's just ready. This is the moment to be done with it. It helped me understand this when I thought about something with myself that really gets on my nerves and makes me want to turn some tables. This is, so I've been a therapeutic massage therapist for about 20 years now. And I take a lot of pride in what I do. I help release the pain from people's bodies. It's not just a physical thing. It's supposed to be a very safe place for people. I've had a lot of people share with me about their tragic pasts. I had one woman in her 70s actually recall a moment of sexual abuse from her father while I'm massaging her, and I was able to kind of help walk her through that. And it was amazing. She was on cloud 9 when she left, so I think it was something that needed to come out and be dealt with. So there's a lot, I take pride in my work, and I've seen what it can do for people. And yet, people are still using massage as a front for prostitution. It's actually happening just down the strip mall from where I work. They always have all the windows closed, and sometimes men come in thinking that we're that place, and they're always very creepy and sketchy, and the therapist is like, no, you're looking for the other place, down there. And it's literally just happening down the street from where I work. And I'm not even going to go into Hollywood's depiction of my profession. It's just always turns into something sexual and prostitution type thing. So I have to work so hard to make sure that I'm being professional, that I'm trying to, no, this is a legitimate career. This is legitimate things are going on here. But I've had to take my career and work off of social media because I was getting propositioned for sex on there. And I would say probably 1 out of every 5 men I tell gets this kind of look like, when I tell them what I do. I'm like, yes, go ahead and think that, whatever. And it ticks me off, and I get angry about it. And I wish I could have a moment where I could go into that massage parlor and go turn some massage tables and start kicking out everybody. Get out of here, get a whip and start kicking everybody out, kicking the tables over and throwing cash around and whatever. And then what I'd do is I'd set up a shop and I'd take the women and I would say, I'm going to teach you how to do a real massage, okay? Like, forget everything you've learned before. Let's teach. Let's get you doing what you're supposed to be doing. Let's have you do some actual healing work. Let's get you doing a proper massage here. And I believe that is exactly what's going on with Jesus at this time. He's known it's going on. He's sick of it. And this is a strategic moment where it's time to come in, turn the tables, get rid of the defilement that's been going on, and then he stays and he teaches the people the right way to live, how this is actually supposed to be going. This is what's supposed to be going on in my house. I'm going to show you. I'm going to correct everything you've been doing wrong, everything you've been teaching wrong, and we're going to start doing this right from now on. Jesus is driving out the enemy from within his own house. He is fulfilling his destiny to be the king and savior of Israel. He's starting by setting things right. He knows that the sin and corruption going on in his people is what's ultimately leading to their destruction because they've broken their covenant with God. So this really is, even though he's not going and driving the Romans out, this is a step towards the peace that they have been promised. And it starts with dealing with the sin and corruption. There's this saying or I don't know if it's a joke or a saying, but it says there, you only have two guarantees in life: death and taxes. And while the Jews were really hoping Jesus would get them out of taxes and their oppression of Rome, what he's ultimately going to do is free them from death itself. And he fulfilled it in part, and we're still waiting for the fulfillment of the peace and him to actually rule as a king on his throne. So there's much more to come. We're going to see that happen, but I'm not going to do it now. You need to stay tuned and come back in the next few weeks, or you can go home and just read the rest of Luke yourself and see how this comes about. But I just really want to press that the peace is still coming. That is something Jesus promised when he ascended to. So the original thing we looked at in Isaiah is going to be fulfilled. It's not that he let them down or didn't do what he was supposed to do. He's starting the long process of something even greater than they could have imagined. So back at the beginning, we asked, what do you want me to do for you? I think a lot of times God doesn't give us, well, as Sam said to me, he said, Marie, God is not a genie. You don't get wishes, but he does come to us sometimes, and he tells us to ask in prayer. And he asks, what do you want from me? But God isn't so much into giving us what we think we want. He gives us what we need, even if we don't realize it yet. Even though it may have seemed to them, and it can seem to us now, that God isn't doing what he said or promised he would do, and it can seem like he's not fulfilling promises that he said or answering prayers that you've prayed, we need to have faith that he is working to give us what we need. And it's usually, as in the case with the Jews and Jesus at the time, it's something much more deep and grand and profound than we even can think to ask for. We just want to be healed of blindness, and he's ready to conquer death for us and bring us everlasting peace. So this week, let's work on letting go of our frustrations of what God isn't doing and press into God and ask him to open our eyes to how he's granting what we don't even realize we need to ask for. Well, I'm going to pray, and then we can be released. Dear Lord, I just thank you for this precious group of people in here today. Lord, I just pray that you would calm the frustrations. I feel like in life, as you're answering prayers, new prayers are always coming up, and new things are coming, and we're hurting for the people we love. And I just pray, God, that you would calm us, give us your peace, and that we would be able to slow down enough to press in and see what you are doing, Lord, how you are answering, how you're giving us what we actually need, Father. And I just pray, God, that you would bless this group of people, Father, and that in turn they would be a blessing and a representation of you to the people around them. Amen.